The AARC is a group of very educated professionals who have studied the Kennedy assassination for decades. And the AARC is currently leading the efforts to try to get the remaining JFK assassination records released. And we've been hard at work at this for several years now. The importance of getting these records out, it has become magnified, in my view, by a couple of developments. One is that we now know that the investigation conducted by the House Select Committee on Assassinations was subverted by an agency that itself was under investigation in connection to the assassination of President Kennedy. That was the CIA. The CIA brought out of retirement a former CIA case officer to handle inquiries that the House Select Committee was making regarding the relationship between Lee Harvey Oswald and the DRE, a human exile organization that was funded by the CIA and managed by the CIA. They brought that case officer out of retirement to handle the HSCA's inquiries. The HSCA was never told by that case officer or by the CIA that the case officer that was acting as liaison with them was the very guy who had been in charge of the DRE at the time Oswald contacted it prior to the assassination of President Kennedy.
The Archive Center was organized in 1984, and of the almost 5 million documents on the Kennedy assassination that have been released so far, the ARC has been responsible for almost 1 million of them. Jim is the president of the organization, and Randy and I are board members. Jim will be speaking later about the problems of getting the last 1,100 documents, or this is an old version, 1,100 documents released from the National Archives, which have been withheld mostly by the CIA and were supposed to have been released a long time ago. So he's been working on that, and we haven't been able to get NARA to agree to this. Would you raise your hand if you have read lots of books or written books and are aware, so I can see? Because, okay, so thank you. It's this is not the typical audience that Randy has developed the data for, because he has approached it in a strictly mathematical and scientific fashion. And it's quite different than any of the speculative or theoretical pieces that people have written about it. Dr. Randolph Robertson is called Randy, and he's a diagnostic radiologist, and the only non-government radiologist who was given permission by the Kennedy family to study the original autopsy materials.
Right.
Since then, he's spent more than 20 years thinking about it and researching the physical aspects of the Dealey Plaza events. There are many hundreds of researchers and academics and scholars, writers, journalists, and investigative reporters who have pored over original records and documents and scoured the literature and the archives for data on the Dealey Plaza shooting. But Randy's the first person to have analyzed the evidence mathematically. He passed every shred of that evidence through a screen of simple scientific criteria. Number one is the speed of sound. Number two is the speed of the bullets used by Mannlicher Carcanos, and this speed was determined by the experts at Edgewood Arsenal. Number three is the distance between the shooter and his target, and the shooter and Mr. Zapruder's camera, and the shooter and the microphone on the motorcycle driven by Officer McLean of the Dallas Police Department. These basic calculations enabled Randy to be the first and so far only person to synchronize the two pieces of irrefutable original evidence, the Zapruder film and the acoustic tape of the gunshots in Dealey Plaza. Ever since the House Select Committee on Assassinations, which is referred to usually as HSCA, acquired that tape, there have been flurries of speculation that the tape wasn't really recorded in Dealey Plaza, or that it was recorded at a specific other time, or the same day at a different time. Serious attempts have been made to prove that Officer McLean was elsewhere when the shots were taken. None of these speculations held up. Randy has not only found visual evidence of Officer McLean's motorcycle on the Zapruder film, but he's also corroborated mathematically and proved that the tape on McLean's motorcycle was recording the 5 shots taken at President Kennedy. As a result, he has now accomplished the only successful and mathematically provable synchronization of the Dealey Plaza audio tape recorded on Officer McLean's motorcycle with the Zapruder film. He's produced a virtual soundtrack for the silent Zapruder frame, which provides corroborated proof of the events in Dealey Plaza. Doc, he's not a conspiracy theorist. He's a scientist and has used only data that can be proven scientifically. He has no political or personal agendas or goals. He has no preconceived conclusions. He has worked with proofed data and used them only when they provide visual and acoustic cross corroborations. That means it needs to be heard on the tape and seen on the film. Randy and I agree that the X-rays have not been altered or forged, that the president's body was not secretly altered, that the Zapruder frames were not manufactured to replace frames deliberately removed. This is close to being provable because if someone at any government agency had done so, they had to have accidentally manufactured a complex covert plot to plant evidence that proves that there were 5 shots taken from 3 sites in Dealey Plaza and murdered President Kennedy. Randy?
Okay, thank you. Well, they've told you who I am. I'm going to run 2 short videos here before I really start. One actually will have the sequence of the virtual soundtrack. Another one will be related to CBS News. And just as a quick background for one of these videos is that CBS News in 1975 commissioned the ITEC Corporation to do a study, quantify the motion seen on the Zapruder film. Now it's interesting because ITEC was a CIA contractor. They developed spy satellites and did photo reconnaissance work. They were entrusted by CBS to provide a study of the film, and for nearly 40 years CBS has known that there was a conspiracy, or should have known very easily. I'll start with these 2 short videos and then I will discuss the synchronization process.
Want me to douse the lights?
Yeah, that may be helpful. Thank you. And a lot of this will deal with involuntary and voluntary reactions, the times of which are well known. You'll get a second chance to see this at the end of the presentation. She quickly snapped her head to the right upon hearing a sound. This is before he was struck, one frame before, and then after as he emerges behind the sign, when he's already in the process of grabbing for his wounded throat. You can see the change in his demeanor and the position of his arms.
Talk up a little.
Pardon?
Talk up a little louder.
Okay. Here's Conley. His right hand moves upwards involuntarily as his chest is struck. This is an indirect response. It's not hit by a bullet, but it causes him to go up like this. Impact from the back with the hand going up. And then he voluntarily starts bringing his wounded arm down to his side. There's the voluntary component. The first is involuntary, then voluntary. Can everyone hear me okay? Yeah.
No, a little louder.
Okay, I'll speak up.
Microphone.
Yeah. But there's two motions of the head, which has been well known for many, and this was actually documented and quantified by the ITEC Corporation. The two shots to the head were so close apart that
So close together.
so close together that they would have been virtually indistinguishable from. And what I've done is, the only way I can think of is to put the microphone on Zapruder's camera, because if it had a microphone, this is exactly what we'd be analyzing today to say what happened back then. And you can see down and then back, and this is the backward motion. This will destroy the single bullet theory. If you watch his wrist, Conley's wrist was not hit at the time our inspector would love you to believe, but actually later from a fragment of the headshot. Watch how rapidly his right wrist goes forwards after that wound. That is roughly half a second between the first image and the second image. And that is an involuntary reaction. He is not responding to any stimuli, it's just a bullet. Now the final shot, we'll see this phenomenon, I'll demonstrate it many times or several times today, of the windshield having been struck at two different times, causing reflections of sunlight back to Zapruder's camera. There was a dent in the chrome windshield frame, which will accommodate the nose of a 6.5 millimeter Mannlicher Carcano bullet. There you see the flash there. It is struck at 328 and it starts to flare at 329 and will continue for about 3 frames. And this is the virtual soundtrack. The 3 first reactions you'll see are Rosemary Willis, hearing the backfire, Kennedy reacting, Conley reacting, involuntary of Kennedy's head back and forth, and the flash of the windshield as it is struck. You'll see the synchronization here between the events and what. You see the synchronization on that flash? You see the light, and the sound travels a little bit slower, but and this is all mathematical. I did not make this up. This is from all of the data from the HSCA acoustic study.
Where's the acoustics coming from? Where is the acoustics coming from?
It is coming from a motorcycle. I'll explain that in just a minute.
Okay.
It's a DictaBelt.
Yeah. This is for CBS now.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
This is for CBS, and the Delta fragment was a large fragment of skull which was recovered from the trunk of the limousine. ITEC looked for particulate matter coming from his head. They failed to know that there were 5 fragments recovered. They only identified 4, and they came exclusively from the front of the president's head. And it is a simple process of elimination to realize that the Delta fragment arose from the back. Here's their tracking of 2 fragments which were ejected out of the limousine and were recovered in Dealey Plaza, and 2 smaller ones that went down into the limo. And we're going to see here that one of the most iconic moments, that density that right past her right glove is part of that fragment. I'll show you that much better because we can actually track it. It was recovered from the rear seat, taken to the autopsy room, x-rayed. It was determined to have a portion of an exit wound in one corner, and every review panel has agreed that this has an exit wound. but they put it in the wrong place. They should have watched the film. And we see Jackie, and if you watch Clint Hill here, he pushes it forwards to her, and he loses his balance in the process. We can compare the two. There's the X-ray, there's the fragment. 4 out the front, 1 later out the back. And there's anatomic landmarks which can fit with this. And Jacqueline Kennedy described this, but her testimony was removed from the Warren Commission about this. A few years ago in 2001, Sobel went in, looked at the transcript reporter's notes, and found what she said. She described it in excruciating detail. It was wedge-shaped. It had little ridges. Those little ridges are a portion of the sagittal suture where your bones come together. There is only one anatomic alignment which will fit, and we've seen it on the film already. Okay? That's just another extra portion of evidence that it came from the top rear of the head. We know it didn't come from the front because 4 of them came out the front, and you can't have an extra one fit in there. So back then, CBS should have known that there were 5 fragments, and everybody knew that Jackie was going on the trunk for one of those. Now, here's the second part. ITEC studied the head motion. It was their conclusion that 2 separate forces acted upon the President's head, first from behind, the second from the front. Spaced, the impact spaced approximately 1/10 of a second and 1/9 of a second apart, 2 Zapruder frames. Forward, backward. 2 separate forces. Okay. Here we go, forwards and backwards. It's very quick, but it is identifiable and quantifiable, and ITEC did it for us. And you can see after the first shot, there is no perturbation in the back of his head. Nothing has moved, nothing has come out. It's only after the second shot that we see the ejection of the delta fragment onto the trunk of the limousine from the force of the second shot from the front. So, CBS News knew that 2 forces acted in opposite directions. The only forces in Dealey Plaza acting that day with sufficient force to affect these motions was bullets. Here's the single bullet theory. They analyzed and quantified the motion of Kennedy and Connolly's hands as they were emerging from behind the sign. They said that Kennedy was already voluntarily reacting to a wound at the time that John Connolly was hit. The dotted line there is Connolly's hand going up, and then the rapid downward movement is that pulling of his arm down to his side. And this is from the ITEC study. As we've seen before, JFK is already reacting even before Connolly is hit. And by the way, Jackie has turned to her right to look at him before that time. Connolly testified that he had turned to his right in response to the first shot that hit Kennedy. So the single bullet theory is a fantasy. It was a political machination to get out of the problem of only 3 shells being found in the 6th floor, when in actuality 5 bullets were found. And again, this is just the upward involuntary motion of Connolly's hand that we see. His hat flips up, his lapel flaps as well, but I think that's from this hat turning it out as it's drug up like that, because the hand motion is indirect. Oh, I will. And delayed down. I guess I can describe this faster than this video, but that's okay. So both men were struck by different bullets. That in and of itself should tell us there was a conspiracy, but we can do much, much more. And there was where his wrist was. We've seen that before. And of course, the only bullet from behind that fragmented significantly was the shot to Kennedy's head. And a fragment of that bullet was caused Connolly's wrist to go forwards. The Dallas doctors testified they thought it was a fragment of a bullet that had caused Connolly's wrist wound, and not a whole pristine bullet as we have in CE 399, the so-called magic bullet that was found on a stretcher in Parkland Hospital. So From 3 different sources, CBS has known for 39 years that there was evidence of conspiracy, if they wanted to identify it or acknowledge it. But they continue to deny it. They'll put on specials. They'll try to do alignments. And we'll let you, got cards or whatever, but go to jfkproject.org. This whole subject will be detailed much more precisely, much more detailed than I'm going to present here today.
What about the Harper fragment? Is that included in the 5
Can we
fragments?
wait till?
Oh, sure.
Yeah. Okay, now, what I have is I've got a photographic documentation of the events as they occurred in the Zapruder film, filmed at 18.5 frames per second, or roughly 1/19 of a second per frame. We can see the voluntary and involuntary reactions of people on the film. Involuntary reactions can be from an immediate impact, which is direct, immediate. Usually the next frame will see it. There is an involuntary startle reaction to a loud sound, which will cause people to jerk a little bit. That occurs approximately 1.5 to 2 Zapruder frames, or 1/10 of a second after the sound is heard. And I'll have some examples of this in just a second. And of course, voluntary reactions are conscious reactions that you make in response to a stimulus, and at the minimum they should take 4 to 5 Zapruder frames, or 1/4 of a second. But you can see whatever type of reaction we are going to identify, it's going to be within 1/4 of a second or 1/10 of a second or less. Here is a guy getting shot in the face. You'll see the immediate reaction of his jaw getting turned around, and then he voluntarily moves away. So that's a direct impact, okay? I'll show it to you once more, but it's just obvious that, you know, you get shot with a bullet, you're going to move real fast, okay? I'm sorry, we're not at a round concert. Now, this is an involuntary. Watch his arms go down. When he hears it, he doesn't know. This is a classic startle reaction. And we're going to see that with Abraham Zapruder as he does his film. See? Okay, you get the idea. Now, in case anyone here doesn't know, and I'll just fill you in, this is a aerial photo of Dealey Plaza. The motorcade came down through Main Street, turned onto Houston, then they made the sharp turn onto Elm Street. That's the journey of the motorcade. And in that motorcade was a motorcycle policeman by the name of McLean, who had his microphone stuck in the on position. He recorded the events that day as they occurred. This was a continuous recording. And unfortunately, the best quality or the best accuracy we can get is by using the film, which is about 1/19 of a second for each frame, which is still good, but that limits us because we don't know exactly when, whether the shutter was open, when it was closed, when exactly the bullet happened to hit during that time period. But it's continuous, the tape is, and the film, we can see everything we need to. And McLean trailed all the way through, recorded everything, and I'll show you here's another short video of his transit. There should be no question that it was McLean's microphone that recorded this. It was not recorded at the trademark. It was not recorded a minute later. It was recorded in Dealey Plaza as the events occurred. Here's the presidential limo. That's the Daltex building. That's going to be a very important building for us to take note of. The TSBD, Texas State School Book Depository, is across the street. I should have pointed that out on the previous one, but we'll have a chance to see it. So there's his position on the Hughes film, just as the motor came. Now here, if you watch very quickly, you'll see a quick white streak going across there. And if you watch the lower arrow, you'll see, and I've got a slower version of it that I'll show you later, but I identified him on Elm Street, or Houston Street, after meticulous calculations. Here's McLean. This was taken by Malcolm Couch just seconds after the assassination. He's on the motorcycle there. So we've got him coming into Dealey Plaza. We got him on the multiple films after the assassination. That was the Malcolm Couch film. Then there was the Bond film, which shows him right there. So certainly there were other motorcyclists there, but we know from the mathematics that he was the only one who could have recorded those sounds went from his position. It had to be him alone who recorded the gunfire. Those circles are the estimated position of the motorcycle as it made its way, journey through the plaza due to the HSCA experts, acoustic experts. There should be no question that he's the guy who recorded this. Now here's the slow version of that film. And it took me a long, long time to do this, but when I knew that the calculations were correct, I knew he had to be there. Now if you watch the red arrow, it will darken and you'll just see his front wheel of his motorcycle between the legs of bystanders right now. You see that up there just above the red arrow?
Yeah.
That is the front wheel of his motorcycle. Now if you watch it this time, you can watch the white streak, which is his helmet. It moves horizontally at a regular pace, and the distance between the front wheel and the position of his motorcycle helmet, we can compare to the other motorcycles, and it's the right distance that we should. His head was about shoulder length, because when you sit on a motorcycle, you crouch down. And that's why it's so hard. You can just see him obscuring things or being obscured as it makes its way through at that point. So we've got him coming in, we've got him, and this is very important because this right about there is the exact time that the first shot was received by his microphone. So from there, I start my calculations. And the one thing about it is that once we have him identified at that spot, there's only about 1.2 seconds, something like that, between the first shot and the second shot. At 11 miles per hour, he only moves 16 feet, which is a very small distance. It's not really going to affect the calculations. For the second shot, we know, as I said, it's only going to be 14, 16 feet. For the third and fourth shots, the two headshots, they come from different directions. We can triangulate his position because in the quarter of a second that those two impulses were received, he traveled 4 feet. So you can basically triangulate his position. The last shot was taken about 0.8, 0.9 seconds after the headshots. And again, he's only moved a small thing. So as far as my calculations go, once I've got him seen and identified on the film precisely where he's at one time, it's pretty easy to calculate the other positions. Now, the amazing thing about this is that the HSCA acoustic experts had absolutely no idea when anyone was hit except for the head wound back in 1978. When they made their predictions here, or not predictions, but actually what they discovered, they couldn't game the system. They couldn't say, oh, well, we know that Connolly was hit here, so we're going to look for some impulses and say when. No, they had no idea. And if they had listened to the medical experts back then, they would have believed that Kennedy and Connolly were hit by the same bullet. Okay? And we will find out that with astonishing accuracy, they were able to identify every one of these, including a backfire, by the way. They knew it wasn't a gunshot, but we'll see, as we have seen, that backfire was what Rosemary Willis was responding to. It wasn't a gunshot. And they, I can tell you, they were not meticulous enough to read all this stuff, the eyewitness evidence, to have her testimony in their minds when they said, oh yeah, we think there's a backfire back there. The one thing I want to do is, I didn't do this alone, okay? I'm a diagnostic radiologist. I know some forensic pathology. I know some forensic anthropology. I'm not an expert in acoustics. I'm not an expert in ballistics. But what I've done is simply taken the government's own data to arrive at my conclusions. I have added nothing to this except my opinion and my analysis and logic as to what happened. Now, in 1994, about 16 years after the HSCA committee, Dr. John Latimer identified that rapid movement of John Connolly's wrist. So we knew, excuse me, exactly when someone was hit. And guess what? That started the synchronization, because I've got 2 points, the head shots and Connolly's chest shots, and we've got the times, and we can say, let's compare one to the other and see if it actually fits. And what we found out is that it does. And we know the speed of bullets, excuse me, and we know from forensics the path of the bullet, that it was shot from the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository. It was shot at frame 221, or 140.32 seconds on the tape. And the one thing about my calculations that no one has done who's attempted to do this is you have to realize that the shot impulse time is not when the shot was fired, it's only when the acoustic wave from that shot reached his microphone. So what we do is I calculate backwards. I know where McLean is. I can know the distance to the TSBD. I say, okay, when in time did that shot originate? I calculate to back, and this turns out to be 0.0. I'll show the calculations on the next frame. I go calculate back to when it started, and then I take the speed of bullets as best I could find them from the Edgewood Army Arsenal test, and calculate when it would hit the limo. Well, comes out to 223, just like John Latimer said. And here it is. I don't want to dwell on this because if you go to my website, I've got all of these distances here, and I have nothing to hide. If anyone wants to do the math again, they're more than welcome to. If they find I'm wrong, they can prove me wrong. No one has been able to do so yet, and I seriously doubt that anyone ever will. But anyway, when we go through the calculations, we find out he was struck at frame 223, just as we see on the Zapruder film, and just the exact distance we've calculated from the tape. And again, I won't dwell on this again, but we know there was an involuntary reaction of Conley and then a voluntary reaction of Conley due to this gunshot. And here again, we can see it clear. Jackie has already turned to look at her husband. She's heard a shot. Conley has already turned to his right because he heard a shot. But they didn't hear the shot that hit Conley because the bullet travels faster than sound. And if we could see Nellie because she did the same thing, okay? They were not mistaken as the Warren Commission thought. They gave exact and correct eyewitness testimony. Here's the motion of JFK's arms right as he comes out from behind the TSBD. I mean, the sign. Now, we have two shots from behind, both of which could not have been fired from the same rifle because the Mannlicher Carcano takes about 2.5 seconds to cycle through. It's manually operated. So, if a second shot was fired from the TSBD, where did the first shot come from? Well, the forensics show that all of the shots fired from behind came from left to right as we look at this next picture here. And there's only one building in Dealey Plaza which offers that trajectory, and that is the Daltex building. And here is this famous 6th floor window where two shots were fired, the second and the fifth shots. And here's a picture taken just after the first couple shots with an open window on the 2nd floor of the Daltex building. This was the origin of two of the other shots from behind. Okay, now I'm kind of going backwards here, but this is just how we're going to do it. We know the calculations from the head shot to Conley synchronize. Well, let's see if the shot from Conley to Kennedy synchronizes and when he was hit. Do the same process. McLean's there. We go backwards to the. Actually, you know what? That is wrong. That is wrong. Because it should be from the TSBD. I mean, from the Daltex building. The first shot was from the Daltex building. The next thing does have the correct math, but when you turns out when I do the calculations, it comes out to frame 202. I'm off by 1/19th of a second. It keeps me up at night. Okay, I can tell you. I don't know why, but it's off by one frame, and I have yet to find out why. But it does not in any way stop me from drawing my conclusions, because I'm only off by 1/19th of a second in the end of it all. Now, there was another, if you remember that list, you probably don't, but there was another impulse they found at 137.70 seconds, which correlates to about frame 173. No one reacts. There's multiple people who took pictures, which timestamp when they took their picture, because we can find out from the Zapruder film, say, okay, what's happening here, what's happening here. We can say this photo was taken at frame X, 202 or 203, and nothing happens then. The acoustic experts knew when they analyzed this tape that they might have some what we call false positives. That's when nothing happened, but you say something happened. This, I believe, is an example of a false positive. I can't completely rule out a shot, but I see no evidence that anyone heard it, or no evidence that it struck anything or caused any damage. Now, we have to look at the headshots, and there's an asterisk there, you might notice. Weiss and Ashkenazi were the ones who tried to do an echolocation, and those spikes that extend above the dotted line there are thought to represent first the muzzle blast, the large muzzle blast from the thing, and then a series of echoes that came off the buildings as that sound wave propagated, bounced off, and came to McLean's microphone. But there's a problem with that, and they said there was a 95% probability that there was one shot to the head from the grassy knoll. Now, it makes absolutely no sense, because we know his head goes forwards and then backwards. The famous JFK Oliver Stone, back and to the left. Well, it was forwards and then back and to the left, not just back and to the left. And it makes no sense. And so when I started looking at this, I haven't told you yet, but there was another group that looked at it before Weiss and Ashkenazi, and that was Dr. Barger and the group from BBN. And they had found another shot a quarter of a second later. Before Weiss and Ashkenazi did their study, they said, well, we think it came from the grassy knoll a quarter second later. Well, they compromised. They said, well, we believe all these pulses are just one string from the first shot. That was their mistake. And here's the synchronization. There's things about the conclusion of a single shot from the grassy knoll at 144.9 that don't make sense. One of which is it doesn't synchronize with the previous shot, because when we do the math, it only goes to 85.5 frames. We know that there's an 89 or 90 frame difference between 312 and 223. It doesn't synchronize in that dimension. And if we try to synchronize it to the following shot, it comes out too late, okay? And the windshield has already started flaring before calculations show that bullet would have hit. So it doesn't synchronize, and it points in the wrong direction. So something was wrong. And what I did was, I came to the conclusion real quickly. I was thinking 144.9, 145.15. How is it that when these guys are looking at these pulses at millisecond levels, that all of a sudden they would change the time of a shot by 250 of those milliseconds? And I came to the conclusion, two movements of the head, we've got two separate shots, both identified by different independent groups. And then you can do the calculations. And this is the diagrams. This is correct this time. I'm sorry about that. McLean's there. We do the shot at 144.9 from the Dallas Police Building, and the shot at 145.15 from the grassy knoll. And guess what? Shot impact time is calculated out to 1/10 of a second, or 2 Zapruder frames, just as the iTech Corporation had told us 2 separate forces acted upon his head. And as I just said before, those were bullets. That's the only forces in Dealey Plaza that could affect that motion. And as I mentioned before, it goes back to frame 223 exactly, as we knew from the film. And when we go forwards, it shows a 1.9 frame difference, 312, 313 forwards, 314, 315 backwards, 2 frame difference. It matches. That's synchronization. Now here, I'll just show you again. And if you watch that grass, see the dark edge of the grass? You can see his head going down below it, and then you'll see it come back up above it, okay? Down and forward, back and up. 2 separate forces, 2 directions, 2 assassins. And iTech, CIA contractor, did the work for us. And they told CBS this very same thing 39 years ago.
Question? So they're saying that there were two forces, but did
Excuse-
they at the time identify two bullets?
No, they didn't. And there have been, I'll answer it. But there have been theories because and we'll get to that in just a moment, but the medical evidence, no one knew or was able to determine that there were two gunshot wounds to the head. And since there was only one gunshot wound to the head from behind by the medical panels, they had to come up with reactions like, oh, it's a reverse jet effect, where the material that was blasted out whipped his head backwards, okay, which can happen, but it's only with highly liquid substances. You need that shock wave to be gone through a liquid substance to do that. And even if it had occurred, we would have seen it on the first frame and not 2 frames later. The other one is a neuromuscular reaction of some bizarre type, which only affected the muscles which were involved in yanking his head backwards at a very rapid velocity. We don't see his back arching, we don't see his legs flying. Those 2 answers are just absolutely untenable. Now here is my complete calculations. All the distances, all the speed of bullets. There's a few small, very small adjustments I make for a difference in the muzzle blast. It takes 1/100th of a second for that acoustic wave to actually start. I've added this in here, but for simplification I just left it out. But as I said, it's here for the world to see. Anybody can take a calculator, compare it. I have no fear, okay? No fear whatsoever. Are these measurements perfect? No, they're not. But they're perfect enough to get us within that one Zapruder frame that we know that that's the best we can do. And everything synchronizes. Now, you mentioned the head wounds, and we're going to get to that now. And this is where my journey started in this. And that is, these are the post-mortem skull x-rays of JFK. Now, by radiological conveyance, right and left are reversed. So the left side of that picture is the right side of JFK's head, and that piece of metal there fits up at the top rear over there. It took me a long time, and I feel really stupid about it. But I finally, and let me just move over here so there's no question. I finally identified this fracture. Down low, and this is very significant because the autopsy doctors who were there to deny the autopsy had been telling the House Select Committee pathologists that the bullet came in low, the bullet came in low. They wouldn't believe them. And no one, radiologist, had described this fracture prior to me doing so, or noted its significance. And it's very significant because it is the crucial point that allows me to determine that he was struck twice in the head. And now we'll go to another view. This was the drawing made for the House Select Committee on Assassinations, and this is what caught me, was I said, wow, they left that fracture out. Why did they do that? And then it came to me, oh, that's where the autopsy doctor said a bullet entered. Now, how can I determine whether that was made by a bullet and whether it was made first or made second? You know, how do we do that? Well, there's a principle in forensic pathology which was done at the beginning of last century, and it's called Papa's Law. And what it states is that a secondary fracture will have its propagating fractures stopped by a pre-existing fracture. And we see this in glass here on the right-hand side. We can tell that the impact on the left-hand side was made secondarily because it doesn't cross that first fracture because there was a pre-existing gap. We have the same pattern in JFK's skull x-ray there. The arrow points to the lower fracture. This is on the left side of his head, by the way, stopping the propagation of that upper fracture. And the bullet that entered down low, and it had to enter down low because that fracture was made first, did not turn around and come out the back of his head. It was the 2 shots from the 2 motions and the 2 acoustic impulses we have on the tape. It all fits, okay? And that's where the multiple review panels made their mistake. No other radiologist had mentioned this fracture or known its significance, and at the even more so, none of them even knew about Papa's Law. In fact, I developed Papa's Law on my own, just mentally, thought it through, and then I presented this to Cyril Wecht, who's a noted forensic pathologist who was on the lone dissenting opinion on the HSCA panel. And when I presented to him, he says, "Oh yeah, we've known that for a long time, Randy. It's called Papa's Law." And I was floored. I just thought, you guys knew this all along. Anyway, here's the 5 shots from 3 spots where they hit. It all synchronizes. And again, let me emphasize, the acoustic experts, they made their mistake and about the headshots. But beyond that, they had 1 false positive, but they got everything else down to 1/100th of a second accuracy without knowing when any of those shots occurred, possibly except the headshot. And no one knew that there was a double headshot at that time. Okay? So you have to believe these guys, because they did this independent of the film. And when we take the film and we synchronize it to the tape, it matches. I mean, you've seen it at the beginning of the program with the film we have, with the things placed exactly per frame when the wounds occurred. Now, we can go much farther. What I'm going to do is weave an intricate tapestry of involuntary and voluntary reactions, not only of the occupants in the limousine, but the photographers who were in Dealey Plaza. And again, we can timestamp them to a particular frame, and we know their distance from each shot, and we know the speed of sound, so we know when that sound would have reached them, and we know when it would have initiated an involuntary reaction, and we can look for it, and we'll find them. Now, Abraham Zapruder was that clump of trees right there around the pergola. I've got it mapped here. He's about 4.5 frames acoustically distant from the TSBD, and he's 6 frames acoustically distant from the Dallas building. So what we will see is differing reaction times for every one of the shots. When you remember the involuntary, well, I'll show you it again. Let's see. That involuntary reaction like this, downward. On the problem, it's not a problem, but for the headshots, as I said, they come in so close, he was simultaneously reacting to both. So we're going to see 4 motions by Zapruder. 2 from the TSBD and 2 from the Daltex. And these are the concentric lines just showing you what the sound waves propagated. Each one of those lines is 1 Zapruder frame, about 58 feet it would travel each Zapruder frame. And so I've got them like this. And people are going to be at different distances, and they're going to react differently based upon their distance from the thing. Zapruder's there. Those are the TSBD. They come in, it takes 4.5 frames to reach him, and it takes him about a frame and a half to react. So from every shot from the TSBD, he will blur his film in a downward manner after the 6th frame. Remember, the first shot was at 221. We're going to see a blur in a downward direction at frame 227. Mathematical precision. Down. And it comes back up, okay? We can run through it once more of it. 226, 227, boom. Blurred the film, then he comes back up. That was the first shot from the first shot from the TSBD, or the second shot in total. That was the one that got Conley. Okay? The last shot from the TSBD was fired 325 to strike at 328. We can just know that from the speed of the bullets and the distance. And the flare occurs, and we also see him with his delayed reaction. 325 plus 6 is 331. Boom. Blur. Okay, with mathematical precision. And it is based upon his distance from a sniper's nest and the speed of sound. Now, that's TSBD. Let's go for the Daltex. We know it's going to be 8 frames. Okay, he's 6 frames and 1.5 to 2 frames to react, so 8 frames after shots from the Daltex, he's going to react. 199, 207, down, down, down. Mathematical precision. .204, 205, 206, 207 starts blurring. Okay, we have 2 distinct sets of reactions by him. And he can duplicate that for the last shot. 309, 310 is when it was shot, 331. 310 plus 8 frames is 318. Let's just watch it again. 314, 15, 16, 17, blur. 8 frames, mathematical precision. Now we don't have to stop there. The backfire. Phil Willis, whose daughter was the one who turned her head, was also taking a photo. This is when he took that photo at 1:39. Now, the backfire, this is a little, it's not as precise because I really don't know exactly where it came from, but I'm assuming it's by a motorcycle that was in the motorcade right next to them. It was fired about 1:35, 1:36. It took possibly 1 frame or even less to get to him, took 2 frames, and he blurred his photo at 1:39. And we know we can compare that photo with the Zapruder film, and I can tell you it was taken at 1:38, 1:39. He blurred his picture in an involuntary startle reaction with mathematical precision. His daughter made a voluntary reaction with mathematical precision as soon as she could in 4 to 5, because it took her 1, so 135 plus 1 is 136 plus 4 or 5 is 141 is when she starts turning. It goes by real fast, but she snaps her head right there. You can see how fast the frames are going. But she was responding to the same shot that he was, okay? Backfire. Nope. Weiss and Ashkenazi and Barger had no idea there was a backfire going on, or when it was. Phil Willis also took a picture, another picture. He didn't blur it, but what he said was, when I took it, I heard the shot simultaneously. Well, guess what? He's 3 Zapruder frames away. It originated at 199, got to him at 202, and that's exactly when he took his photograph, and that's exactly his testimony. And you can see him taking his picture at 202, and up there, just to the right of that green sign, is Abraham Zapruder on his pedestal, filming Willis while Willis is taking a picture of him, okay? Again, mathematical precision based upon distance and speed of sound. Another person, Charles Bronson, said he blurred a photo when he heard a shot. Well, he was 6 frames from the TSBD, so 221 plus 6 is 227. It took him 2 frames to react. He took his picture at 229, okay? Again, different people, different distances, all synchronizing exactly with the tape. I've shown you the one flash. There was a crack in the windshield. Not only did the fragment hit Connolly's wrist, well, this is kind of cut off right here, but can you just pull that to the side and see if it'll work? No, it's not gonna move. Anyway, there's a small flare at 314 because a fragment of that bullet that went through Kennedy's head also cracked the windshield in addition to doing Connolly's wrist. Okay, and it happens 1 frame later. And we also have seen already the last flare from the bullet hitting the windshield frame at 328. Now, I'm just going to run through this again. This is the Zapruder film with the soundtrack. And again, watch the voluntary reactions of Rosemary Willis, Kennedy, Connolly. Watch the involuntary reactions of Kennedy's head forward and backward, Connolly's wrist forward. You'll see the windshield flare at 331. Just after you'll see the flare and then you'll hear the shot immediately afterwards. And we need the volume up this time. Now there is a slight delay, but there should be because, you know, bullets travel faster than sound. That was the backfire. Voluntary, voluntary, involuntary, involuntary flare. And this is basically a virtual soundtrack. It's not perfect because back then there was ambient sound, there was echoes, there was everything going on. But if you can clearly hear every one of those shots, that's exactly what you would have heard. And we see all of the involuntary and involuntary reactions occurring at the precise time they should for every one of these shots that was identified by the HSCA acoustic experts.
Those are not sounds from the tape.
No, because the tape is almost inaudible, yeah, basically. And they had to do a lot of mathematics. It's a very complicated process. They had to subtract out the motorcycle hum, lots of stuff. But whatever they did, they sure nailed it because they got every shot down to the 100th of a second, okay? Now, I have attempted to get this material peer-reviewed in the medical literature. No one's going to publish it, okay? And I've tried numerous journals. And I don't know if you can read this, but I will read it for you. This was probably the quintessential letter of rejection from the Journal of Forensic Science, a medical publication devoted to science and the search for truth and what's right. And here's what they told me. Some words of explanation to you are in order with respect to this submission. First, there appears to be nothing materially wrong with this work from a technical standpoint. Okay?
Wow.
However, the central issue for us for some time has been whether to reopen this controversial matter in this publication.
No.
This problem surfaces periodically when we receive a submission such as this one. They haven't received submissions like mine. Okay? I have again discussed this matter again at length with knowledgeable people on our board. It's not just the editor, it's the board of the Journal of Forensic Science who's saying this. Okay? I am persuaded at this time that no re-examination of the evidence and data in the case, no matter how carefully done, will put the controversial issues to rest, nor convince the various different opinion holders of the errors in their ways. In addition, publication of any medical or technical item on this case, in our view, would open the floodgates, open to a flood of items, even the sum total of which would not in the end settle anything or lay the matter to rest. Okay? Now this is a medical scientific journal, and that is their policy.
Wow.
And that's why you've not seen this for 20 years.
Wow.
But it didn't stop me, because I knew I was right. And my whole journey started with those x-rays. And I knew this, I mean, I didn't know beans when I started out, okay? I had to recreate this, start from ground zero, convince myself that everything was real, and the more I saw, the more it fit, and the more I said, no one with this degree of specificity, down to sutures in pieces of bone that place them in the right position, he had to have been shot twice in the head. And guess what? When I approached the acoustic evidence, which Weiss and Ashkenazi compromised on to just one shot to the head, it came true. And I knew it was going to come true because when you've got a forward and backward motion, and I've got Papa's Law, I know he was shot twice in the head 20 years ago. It's just about 2 years ago that I started my analysis of this very complicated acoustic evidence. And what you've seen today is the end result. And I'll open it up. Well, actually, Jim, you can talk, and then, or would you like me to take questions and you talk?
Can I make a real quick but very important announcement? I'm Jerry Pollock. I'm the executive director of the AARC, and we're all four of us on the board. We're going to be holding a conference in September commemorating the 50th anniversary of the assassination, and I'm just going to pass
Of the
around
Warren Report.
of the
Warren Report,
I'm sorry.
yeah.
And I'm just going to be passing around some sheets if anybody, we're just putting it together. But if you're interested, sign it, and we will get in touch with you and let you know more.
Are you saying that that shot from the Texas School Book Depository hit Kennedy in the back, came out his throat, and that the throat shot was not a frontal shot?
Well, it was from the Daltex, which was a flatter thing, and this
Okay.
was an exit wound. This was an exit wound.
Okay, even if we postulate that it was from Daltex and it couldn't have been a downward trajectory.
Right.
Okay, but the Secret Service that all saw him placed the shot 4 inches down from the right shoulder. So whether another shot in the back came out his throat, there's still not, you have to account for the wound 4 inches down from the right shoulder. Also, what happened to the shot that missed and hit Tay?
That's the bullet that hit Tay.
Say that again, please.
There was a bullet that went downfield and hit a curve, and the cement kicked up and cut a bystander's
Tay.
cheek. Now, what you have to realize, and this is very complicated, and it took me a while to figure it out myself, but it was at a flat trajectory. It went in at a downwards angle, not much, but it had to deflect upwards because even the HSCA medical panel said that it was on an upward trajectory as it came out. Now, if it came up, it had to deflect. And what it did was, it probably hit one of his first or second ribs or the spinous processes, and no matter where it was, it had to go down first, and then it went up. And that is evidenced by, this is very technical, an abrasion collar. The abrasion collar in the back of that wound is on the inferior aspect. You would normally suspect it to be on the upper portion as it came down. It would press the skin more and abrade more on the upper surface. But what happened is, it went down, met a hard object, one of his ribs or the spinous process, transverse processes of the spine, and went like that. And in that process, it pushed the tail down, causing the abrasion on the lower aspect. That bullet went up and out because guess what? It didn't hit Conley. It didn't crack the windshield. And if it had hit the chrome frame, they would have heard it immediately. In fact, I don't know if you saw it, but Clint Hill, the last shot sounded like metal on metal, which is a shot hitting there. So from a process of trajectories and everything, and the problem is if you got an entry here and an entry here, where did both bullets go? But if you line it up from two
If it came from the front, it could have gone into the lung.
but there wasn't any bullets there on x-rays, you know. And
But Dr. Rose said that, who performed the tracheostomy to help Kennedy breathe, that wound in the throat was as big as a little pinprick, and those are wounds of entry. And
well, but you got a hole
taken,
in the front, you got a hole in the back, you don't have a bullet in the body, and when you look at it, TAG is right in line, and guess what? If it hadn't fragmented, it was going to be the most aerodynamic missile of that day. Something had to go way downfield to hit TAG, and the only thing that I could think of is a minimally deformed, non-fragmented bullet, and that accounts for this, and that, because if it had gone somewhere else, it would have hit somebody.
Do you have 27?
No, not on this
Okay.
presentation, no. I addressed that, by the way, in my, if you go to www.jfkproject.org, that is addressed. Now, I believe you were the next one, had a question, yeah.
Well, I have so many, but one of them is, the CIA was used by the CIA, excuse me, or CIA.
It was a contractor.
Okay.
Yeah, well, the head of it was, Jerry, you actually interviewed him.
Yeah, John Lindsay, and he actually had worked with the CIA
Okay.
before he went to head ITAC.
Right.
And I did interview him.
Yeah, and the ITEC did contract work for the CIA, developing spy satellites and doing photo reconnaissance.
So if there's, of course, one theory that the CIA was behind the assassination, one of the many, would they not have tried to influence ITEC's conclusions if they did
Well,
it?
I think if you read the ITEC study closely, you'll notice, and actually you may not because you may probably have not read the whole study, but the way that they nuanced the movements of Connolly's hand and Kennedy was such that you had to make an extra jump to say, oh, you know, what you're really saying there is that they were shot by different bullets, okay? The same thing for the head wounds. They said, we see a forward motion, we see a backward motion, and even they said, well, we debated on what caused it. We didn't, you know, they had no answer to it. They didn't want to say bullets because, you know, that would mean obviously a conspiracy. And so all I can do is trust their measurements, and their measurements are correct. And what their motivation might have been to cover it up, I don't know, but they certainly helped me out a lot, you know. And by the way, anything I say is verifiable. It's mathematics, okay? If there's anybody out there who doesn't like my math, take a calculator, go through it, and prove me wrong. And you're not going to be able to do it.
I do have one question, though I'm confused.
Mhm.
You said there were
Louder,
two snipers
please.
nests, you said in the one building, but then you're also saying that there was a shot from the other building?
The first shot was from the Daltex building,
Okay.
you know, the open window down low.
Right.
That was Kennedy's back and throat. The second shot was from the TSBD to Connolly's chest and thigh. The third shot was behind from the Daltex, going through Kennedy's head, fragmenting, hitting Connolly's wrist, cracking the windshield. The fourth shot came from the grassy knoll, drove his head backwards, ejected the Delta fragment onto the trunk of the limo. It's an exit wound. The fifth shot hit the chrome windshield. That was from the TSBD. Hit the chrome windshield frame, and I believe it continued forwards and struck near the sewer drain, because when you line things up, that's exactly where it's going to line up.
So there are 3 people.
Yes, 5 shots from 3 locations, yes.
2
Yes.
locations or
3. Daltex, TSBD, grassy knoll. 2 shots from the Daltex, 2 shots from the TSBD, 1 from the grassy knoll. Yes?
And I wish you would have started out your presentation with that, because you had that way at the end, and I was lost halfway through trying to
I know,
figure
when I say first, second, it's like, well, is it the first shot in the
Yeah.
whole series, or is it the first shot from
Yeah,
that
but
building,
you
or
just
whatever?
said 5
Are you
bullets.
clear now, though?
Now I am, but I have
Oh,
a
good,
question.
good.
I have
As
a
long as you
question.
walk away knowing what happened,
Well, that's
we'll
what,
be good.
but I have a question though.
Yeah.
I know, because I have followed this, and I watched the PBS stuff with all the different versions and stuff.
yeah.
But I also followed Bugliosi, who said he went through all of them, and then he wrote that multi-volume thing defending the Warren Commission report. Now, was yours one of the ones that he took up, or what's your view of
No.
Bugliosi's investigation?
Anyone who believes that there was not a conspiracy in the JFK assassination needs to take a critical thinking class. Because critical thinking, logic, because there is a preponderance of evidence. And Jim and Brenda here are on the other side. I've got the easy job, okay? I just have to show that there was assassination. They're trying to work and find out who the forces were and who might be responsible and what their motivations were.
And he doesn't want to hear it.
Mine is apolitical. I'm interested, but it's like, I have no talents in that regard. But these people do. And that's why we need the documents released. And Jim will discuss that, because it has been 50 years. I think this is a definitive study. I can any audience of open-minded individuals who have critical thinking capabilities, and they're going to believe, and they're going to know that JFK was shot from 5 shots from 3 different directions, and there was conspiracy, because one nut in the 6th floor of the TSBD couldn't have done it, okay? That is a fact. Now, if that's a fact, we need to release the rest of these documents, because the American people deserve to know the truth. We've waited too long. Yeah.
Randy, how sure are you that those shots came from the TSBB?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Why
Because
are you so sure?
because of Zapruder's reaction. He reacts differently to the 2 different sets of shots. They had to be at different distances.
But what makes you so sure they came from that window?
Eyewitnesses saw some motion. Now, was Lee Harvey Oswald up there? I have my serious doubts about that. And I really, this is my position. I don't care. I mean, in a way I do, but for my analysis, I don't care. It's just the fact that we have 5 shots from 3 spots. After that, it's a conspiracy, and and I'll tell you the funny thing about this, though, is that when you start thinking about this, guess what the guy from the TSBD did? His first shot was a non-lethal shot to Connolly. His second shot hit the chrome windshield frame. Whoever it was who was up in that window could only be charged with conspiracy of murder or attempted murder, because he was not the deadly gunman. The deadly gunmen were in the Daltex and the grassy knoll. So the 6th floor museum's in the wrong building. Yes?
Yeah, just a crucial question, because I've become aware of this, just by, I think, Doug Horn and Jim Fetzer, about the Zapruder film. And the
Possible. Here's my answer.
the provenance of the Zapruder film, and the fact that there were 2 different versions of it that were edited a couple of days after the assassination.
Well, let me just
So
say,
that would throw off, and some people said there were frames missing.
well, that's what I'm going to address right now, is that if there were a significant number of frames missing, more than one, it would only, I would see if there was 1 frame by the map. There isn't one missing. And if you want to say, well, someone cut out 3 from, what's cutting out 1/6 of a second going to do? What are you hiding with that 1/6 of a second?
What about the cross corroboration of other photographs? The other, all the photographers, what they show is cross-corroborated by the Zapruder.
Oh, yes, that's true. Yeah, and, you know,
The theory was, what it showed was a much larger ejection of matter from Kennedy's head.
well, I mean, the matter doesn't, I mean, the thing that matters, sorry to put it that way, is that 4 skull fragments went out the front initially, leaving the back, top, rear of the head unperturbed, and that after a second impact, a piece of bone, which has been universally agreed upon by every single medical review panel as well as the autopsy team, which has specific anatomic landmarks which place it to the top rear of the head, and which Jacqueline Kennedy described in detail, as we've seen. That does not happen by fakery.
Excuse me, I have something to add to that.
Mhm.
If any of these substitutions or removals were done deliberately, it's really odd, because the precise construction of the film and of the audio tape prove unequivocally that there were 5 shots and from 3 different sites. It would have been incredibly stupid of any agency to have put it together that way.
Yeah.
Except that the tape was never released, it was stolen.
Yeah.
We never saw the Zapruder film, it was stolen by
Well, but
Robert
if they
Grossman.
faked it, why would they
From
leave
the-
it?
No.
No.
Yep, we
That's
got another
not the
question.
case.
Can you address the physics of Kennedy's reaction when he had that mass? I just want to know, is it possible that behind he could have reacted that way? Is it possible?
Well, it would have to be an involuntary reaction.
No,
Yeah.
the massive head wound, when after he reacted, is it possible, because the Warren Commission says that yes, of course, that bullet came from behind, and that,
Right.
but is it possible, is the physics of his reaction, is it possible that a bullet from behind can cause Kennedy to react that way?
Well, no, it took 2 bullets, because the first bullet from
Yeah.
behind moved it forwards, and the second bullet from the front moved it backwards.
Yeah, so is it possible for Kennedy to have been shot from behind that killed him, and he reacted that way? Is it
Oh,
possible?
no, because...
It's not possible.
Because it happens I mean, it's on
Yeah.
1/10 of a second.
Yeah.
You know, and the other thing is, have you ever tried to throw your head backwards? You know, you can't do it, okay? I mean, you don't do it fast, and you can't, I mean, and plus, if it's voluntary, but his head is blown, his neurons are gone. He can't
So
react.
it's impossible that a shot from behind could cause him to react backwards and to the left.
I believe
right?
so, yeah. And to me, it's very, we've got Papa's Law here, okay?
Yeah.
I mean, I can take, in fact, if I had the time, I could show you the pictures of his head, and I can show you the missing corner of the bone fragment, the delta fragment that's in those autopsy photos. Everything fits down to the tiniest detail that I can determine. And to me, as I've gone along, there's no fakery. If someone tried to fake it and make it look like there wasn't a conspiracy, they failed miserably, you know, because in Weiss and Ashkenazi and the HSCA, down to the 100th of a second, and they didn't have any guidance. How does that happen? That's science, okay? That's mathematics, and that's how things work out.
By the way, Zapruder, Gruden was working with a copy of the Z film, not the original.
Yeah.
And I know
My
that.
question is about spotting the location on the grassy knoll, like in the Daltech building, you show the window
Uh-huh.
open.
Oh.
Aren't there pictures of a possible person by the grassy knoll? And
Yes,
Is that
yes.
how you spotted it, through those?
Well, I differ somewhat from the HSCA. How long do we go? Till 7?
Yeah, half hour.
Yes.
Okay, all right, because I want to give Jim time.
Yes.
Okay. Josiah Thompson, Tink Thompson, wrote a seminal work, 6 Seconds in Dallas. There was a fellow, Sam Holland, who was on the overpass, who watched the events and immediately ran over there because he saw a puff of smoke. Near that site, there was a car where there had been, he said it looked like lions pacing in a cage, waiting for someone, with cigarette butts there. And he had S.M. Holland stand behind the fence, and he took a picture of it. And there was like a little, he said there was a little anomaly, which may be the head of the guy. I don't know, but I can tell you there was a gunman there. because he's not photographically documented, I'm sorry, I wish we had clear photos of that, and this would all have been over many years ago. But the physics and the timing just dictate that there was someone there. And he was in a position in the shadows where he has not been photographically identified to this day.
When Jackie lunges backward in the limo after the last, she's attempting to retrieve the Delta fragment?
Yes.
Clint Hill testified and then spoke recently about it. I think it was in his book. I haven't read that yet. But what he said was that he saw it, gave it to her, and pushed her back into the car. And
He pushed her back.
Well, he kind of moved her
She
into
didn't
the.
lunge back.
Well, he said that, but it didn't happen.
Yeah, but it certainly isn't on the film. But he put her. He remembers putting her in the car. In any event, he does remember giving her the segment, and she took it into the car or with her, and it was removed from the car seat at Parkland.
Well, no, actually it was found.
The Secret Service, I thought.
Well, the Secret Service found it on the flight back. It was in the rear seat of the limo. And the other thing is that there was only one fragment of skull that Jackie could have seen, because the there was the two fragments that went out into the limo, or into the Dealey Plaza, which we have documentary records for and receipts for. They were gone so fast she couldn't have described them at all. The other two which were also in the documentary record, were too small for her to even, had no characteristics. And the only fragment that she could have seen, and the one she accurately described, was the Delta fragment. And again, if you go to my website, you'll see it, but when you go through, you'll see her going back. Clint Hill actually pushes it forwards to it, because it came all the way back to the end of the limo. He gets on, he pushes it, and he loses his balance in the process, and you'll see him get off, and then he has to remount. And it was that action, pushing it forward to her, is what it was, caused it.
The 3 shells that are found below the window, the casings,
Yeah,
and the bullet found on the stretcher going into the
Uh-huh.
is that just speculation? Is that just a phony thing?
Well, I've come to the conclusion that I know that only 2 shots were fired from the TSBD. There were 3 shells there. The 3rd shell that was found had unusual characteristics, one of which was a dented lip of the edge, which means that it couldn't have been fired that day. And also people have said that it had evidence of having been put into another rifle for like a dry run. Okay, so that was a plant. The other 2 are probably real. And the CE-399, people are going to hate me for it, but I believe it's real. It did not, you've got to think that the magic bullet, they say, well, it goes through Kennedy, hits Connolly, hits the wrist, goes here, too much fragmentation. But if you think about it, it didn't do that. All it did was it hit Connolly's wrist and embedded in his thigh. And he complained of extreme pain in the emergency room. He's got a chest wound. He's got a fractured radius, okay? And he's complaining about it when they're pulling his pants off. Guess why? Because the bullet was sticking out and it was probably dislodged at that point in view. And I've studied this, and you can follow his stretcher, and it goes down, and it's ballistically matched. And the big thing about the CE-399 is, okay, if it's a plant, who planted, when they get the rifle to do so, how did they do it? It's like, it's much easier to just say, it did less than what it was supposed to do, and that was enough. So, anybody else?
The Harper fragment was found by
The
that
next
kid
day.
Harper and gave it
Yeah.
to his father.
Yeah. Yes?
I just want to share something with you. I found that that day before he was, killed, he said that Kennedy was shot by, there was a talking between Kennedy and Minister Bonjour of Israel. There was conflict because he told him he has to stop the nuclear weapon in the Middle East. And he told him, if you want me to do that, I have to come to Dimona. I have to stop you first, then I can, spread peace and justice in the Middle East. And then Bonjour got, upset. And he gave the order to the Mossad, and the Mossad with some CIA members did the plan. That's what he said. And then I went online to check. Then I found an author, an American author, wrote the same thing about this in New York Times magazine, I believe. Yeah. And it's like, I just start looking for documentaries on YouTube, and I found other things, the way he was killed, that, you know, it was conspiracy about the seat, about maybe someone, the driver, maybe he hit him too. It's like, that's why it's like I start looking for the truth. It is conspiracy. It's like,
You also have
yeah.
to go back to original sources. Don't believe what other people say.
Yeah, of
If
course.
I believe what every Kennedy conspiracy theorist said, I wouldn't be standing here today. I'd be out there thinking that things were fake, you know. So, yes, sir.
You had trouble publishing your work as your show. Is it safe to assume that all the people who've written, and the cold case PBS program or whatever, all of these, Posner, Pelosi, none of them were privy to your
No,
work?
no, I've not published this in any, well, one, I had very naively tried to get it published in the medical literature for many years. After about 3 years or 4 years, I just gave up. I just knew that the writing was on the wall, no matter how good and actually, you know, I wasn't doing this whole thing. I was just saying, look at the skull x-rays. There's Puppis phenomenon here. We've got intersecting, pattern of intersecting fracture lines. Let's just say that as an alternative explanation, throw it out there. No, they wouldn't let it even do that. So I didn't stop. I kept on learning. I kept on refining. And then, as I said, 2 years ago, I knew from the forensic evidence that there was conspiracy, and I knew the acoustic evidence was out there, which I had not thought was very valid before. And when I addressed it, I saw that difference between Weiss and Ashkenazi and the BVN people with the two things, and I started my calculations. And I did thousands and thousands and thousands of calculations. It took me a long time to figure out the frame rate and everything like that. So, yes?
Do you think there's anything in the PBS cold case program that you found revealing or valid?
Actually, I don't think I've seen that. I've watched occasionally. To tell you the truth, I am probably the least read of all of the people in the Kennedy assassination because so much of it there is misunderstandings, and all I do is get confused when I read it. Now, as far as a good book that will prove to me, and I think it's one of the stellar books out there, is John Newman's Oswald and the CIA. It's a very dense tome. It's about this thick, but when you get through with that book, if you don't think Oswald had intelligence contacts, then again, you need to go to a critical thinking class. And why don't we take a break now and unless you want to go right through it, Jim, or I can go right now. Okay, great. Thank you.